Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this first episode of the Realists. An odd bunch. We have a diplomat, an ex-military person, and a successful British business person. So hopefully we'll try and straddle all three kind of areas as we take a realistic view on world events. People probably know me. I'm Ian Proud. I was a British diplomat for 24 years, including 4.5 years in Moscow. Steve Jermy, he's a retired naval Commodore, which is a one-star general post, starting with a combat role because he's an aviator in the Falklands conflict in 1982, and actually serving in Afghanistan around the time that I was in Afghanistan, for him getting a bit of a taste of embassy life while he was there. And then the brilliant and inimitable Ian Puddick, a great mate of mine. We sort of met shortly after I left the diplomatic service. He's got a successful businesses, and he knows more about leaks than most members of the diplomatic service. It's probably the best way to describe that. He also supplies gin to NATO somehow, and they still talk to him, even though he thinks most things they do are deleterious to world peace. So that's us. And our special guest today, somebody I've met a couple of times already, really enjoyed talking with. Everybody will know is Larry Johnson, ex-CIA chap. Larry, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's a great honor.
No, thanks for joining us. As a guest, and you're our first guest, we were so excited. I feel like a child again, so it's cool.
I just set the bar low. That's what I'm good at.
I wasn't being kind. I did actually genuinely mean that.
Yeah, I was saying before we came on air that I've been searching for this lime green Hawaiian shirt that I was desperate to wear just to make Larry feel really welcome. So I'm quite annoyed that I've got an old diplomatic shirt on instead. We're going to start.
When you move to Florida, they issue you these as it's part of the requirement to live here.
I tweeted earlier, Larry. I found a photograph of you in one of your wonderful shirts and a photograph of Magnum PI, and I put you both together and I tweeted that.
They go. Who's the ugly guy on the left?
Well, they both have moustaches.
Yeah.
Yeah, the ugly guy's Selleck, right?
Yeah.
I bet you don't wear tight shorts though, like he does.
No.
Anyway,
away from those.
So let's jump into on the will he, won't he kind of, is Trump doing a taco version 2? Is he going to chicken out? Is this all part of his, art of the deal? Is he just trying to strong arm the Iranians to come to the table for a nuclear deal? From the diplomatic and political side, I mean, what's your read on what the hell's happening right now inside the Beltway?
Yeah, this is like watching an Olympics gymnastic competition. All the backflips and forward flips and triple axles. Good Lord. The latest, and I mean, it was literally 15 minutes ago, according to Carolyn Levitt, the spokeswoman for President Trump. Trump's going to wait 2 weeks to figure out what he's going to do. Okay? So now we went from it was imminent, and I was hearing this from my contacts that are still active duty in the military. I mean, they literally thought we were going to start launching last Thursday, a week ago. Mm-hmm. So Trump's been, I'm going to do it, I'm not going to do it. I'm hoping that one of the things that's causing him to pause is this has split the MAGA base in half.
Yeah, completely.
I wrote a piece yesterday at sonar21.com. I gave a speech before the Manatee County Republican Party. They have a luncheon once a month. And I was shocked that you're not going to find a county in the United States that's more pro-Trump. I mean, these people bleed red, and, MAGA all the way. And there was an enormous amount of concern being voiced, and even anger at the notion that Trump was going to actually possibly get us embroiled in a war in Iran. Mm-hmm. And you've got a lot of prominent voices. I don't know if you had a chance to watch Tucker Carlson take the hide off of Ted Cruz.
Big time.
Quite great entertainment. It was free. And then the conversation between Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson. Candace Owens who I think she's married to a Brit. She's been, she's got quite a following, and she's been lashing into Trump on this. Even Charlie Kirk of Turning Point USA. So there's definitely a disturbance in the MAGA force, and maybe that's penetrating Trump.
One of the things that I found interesting about the Carlson interview with Cruz, and it's that, we're used to in the UK having politicians who are completely clueless about what's happening in the world. This is nothing new to us. They all seem to be, like that. But the fascinating thing about the Carlson interview was it revealed, that Cruz knew absolutely nothing at all about Iran, except that he wanted America to go to a war, with Iran. Is that a general? Because I know people like Lindsey Graham are the same, although he actually spends a lot of time in Kiev, as we all kind of know. But is that the same level of airheaded, brainlessness a condition in Washington as it is in Westminster?
Yeah. Oh, yes. I mean, in fact, the joke always is that the senators and the members of Congress are the D students, the students that barely got a passing grade, and the people they've got working for them are the Harvard and Oxford grads, the people who graduated at the top of their class. And Cruz is considered one of the, smarter guys up there. But, when you watch him and he says, basically, God says I've got to support Israel. It says that in the Bible. And Tucker, who, he's not an atheist or agnostic, but man, he about fell out of his chair on that one. Yeah. You got to be kidding me. Which, and I think the biblical verse that Cruz was quoting was the first book of Assumptions.
Yeah, of course. Chapter 2.
I said one more question before I hand over maybe to Steve. Steve and Ian. I mean, actually, on the Bible thing, Kelly Vlahos, a good friend at the Quincy, circulated a quote on X from Hegseth about saying he doesn't bother reading books except for the Bible, which I found astounding for the defense secretary. But what is the end game? I mean, what do you think Trump has in his mind where he wants to get to with this? Or is he just... does he just have no plan? Because that's what it appears from the outside.
Well, they're not following he does not have a plan. He's following that which was, let's say, the deep state had prepared, because this cooperation with Israel on the attacks that were launched on June 13th, that was, the planning for that started last year under Biden. So clearly this was a carryover with the CIA when he comes in and he gets briefed on it. It is, the goal is regime change. This whole nonsense about Iran has a nuke. It's just that's a red herring. It's an excuse.
Yeah, for the last 30 years.
Pardon?
Yeah, for the last 30 years.
Yeah. When you watch Netanyahu make his repeated statements about they're just 2 weeks away. I did sort of a play on the old. Instead of the boy who cried wolf, I called it the Jew who cries nuke.
I watched that as well, actually. I think the interesting thing is what was his initial objective? And I think it was, you think it's regime change, I think it was regime change, coloured as nuclear. Because my sense was that they didn't get regime change quickly. Then suddenly the next objective for Netanyahu would be they'd be in trouble, so they needed to get the Americans in. So I think his fallback objective is if they're not winning, and it certainly seems that the tide is turning against them really quickly. If they're not winning, his only way out is to get the Americans in. I don't know what you think.
No, that's exactly right, because they thought that you just drop a few bombs and you kill a few people that you're going to, quote, decapitate. And I'm not aware of a single decapitation strategy that's actually ever really worked. No. This notion that you kill the top guy, and you, Steve, by virtue of your background, there's a reason there's officers and there's a chain of command, because if the top people get killed, there's a whole lot of people below there that are happy to step up.
Yeah, thank goodness we haven't decapitated Russia and got rid of Putin.
No. Things will turn out so much better, and I can't emphasize enough the lack of planning about this. One of my CIA colleagues we started off together in the career trainee program back in 1985, and later he was an ops officer. His focus was Iran. They put him in charge of the Iran task force. They set up a task force in 2006, and the entire goal was to overthrow the regime in Iran. And my friend, he's now in charge of this, but he started asking the questions like, okay, what comes next? And the answer was, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. Now that was at the top level of CIA planning. Yeah. And my friend is actually a very smart person. He said, oh, that's great. And then he went and put in for a demotion. He got transferred out. He got the hell out. Because he recognized this was just a disaster waiting to happen. I guarantee you that's what's going on now.
Can I throw Trump a lifeline? And when I say throw Trump a lifeline, right, that doesn't come naturally for me to say, just to emphasize that. So, I mean, I'm quite an optimist. I don't know, I'm definitely an optimist. But there's a teeny weeny little bit of me that says that Trump might be taking this to the nth degree as a bluff, as a negotiating tactic, on the hope that he'll pull back. Is he really insane enough to do this? I don't know. I suggest probably he is, by the way. But the reason I asked that earlier, I was listening to Judge Knapp earlier, talking to Colonel Douglas McGregor, and they both said that Trump had now been captured by the neocons, and he decided that he just couldn't beat them, and it was just easier to go along. And I just wanted to believe that possibly might not be true. I just wondered what your thoughts were.
Yeah, I'm afraid that he has been captured.
Sure.
He has, the deal, if it's just about making a deal, the deal's been available there since, the start of the year. Iran will happily, allow any inspection, any international guarantee that's required to demonstrate that they're not building a nuke. They're going to continue to enrich at the peaceful level, maybe up to 20%. Of that because of the medical isotopes that are derived for treatment of cancer. But beyond that, they're ready to make the deal. Trump is, he is financially beholden. Not that his own personal wealth depends on it, but because of just the relationship with people like Miriam Adelson.
100 million.
And then you've got these other, multi-billionaires, people like Bill Ackman of Pershing Square. He's another sort of ardent Zionist. And I want to draw that distinction, the Zionist versus Judaism, because
100%, of course.
There are a lot of people of the Jewish faith that are just appalled and horrified by this. Absolutely. I mean, Jeffrey Sachs, Max Blumenthal, among others. So unfortunately, Trump, he was rhetorically committed to that, and he's going to be hung by his own words. This is I call it his George H.W. Bush, read my lips, no new taxes moment. If he goes through with this, even though he's not eligible for re-election, it will destroy his political base, and he will be impotent.
Yeah. And Tulsi, sorry, Ian. Sorry.
I was just struck by because I listened to the announcement about 2 weeks, and it was interesting that Witkoff's back. His name is back in there, and I thought, okay, well, like you, Ian, I thought, oh, that sounds a bit better actually, because Witkoff may be a real estate guy, but he certainly seems to have a much better understanding of people and empathy and working out what will work and what will not. So, but anyway, sorry, and I interrupted.
No, not at all. I was going to say, Tulsi Gabbard, is she? No, I keep seeing online. She's got to resign. She's got to resign. She's got to resign. Well, Trump hasn't actually done anything yet. Technically, I know that Ted Cruz let the cat out of the bag that the Americans are involved. Shock horror. I mean, nobody will be surprised at that whatsoever. But do you think Tulsi? If there are British. I work with the MOD. I supply the MOD. We have special British forces in Tehran at the moment between 9 and 12, doing reconnaissance, whatever that means. I have no idea. I can could mean 100 different things, but I would suggest they're not there handing out food aid.
Right.
So we when I say the royal we, the US and the Brits are involved. Do you think once it kicks off, Tulsi will resign?
There's a part of me, I understand like why Ray McGovern has said, oh, she should resign now. Never am I, so I started off in 85.
I don't think
I continued to hold clearances through 2016 and was actively involved with the CIA and other intelligence organizations. I have never, ever heard a president disrespect either the chief, in this case, the director of national intelligence, or prior to that, the director of CIA. Never. It was because when you're, it's one thing. We all believe that privately the president said, I don't believe that crap out of the CIA and I'm going to do what I want, but they don't say it in public. So I guess we can give Trump credit for being honest, but that's about where you draw the line. I'm hoping, and I think Tulsi recognizes she's maybe still better off staying in to be a voice of dissident. And in fact, it looks like she's been effective because Trump, my understanding from my military contacts, we were ready to launch yesterday. And the foot's come off the accelerator. And whether that's because of Tulsi or not, I don't know. But the intelligence will continue to say Iran is not building a bomb. They're not. It's just a red herring. This is an excuse to get rid of they think they can get rid of the mullahs. And they've actually, this entire fiasco has had the exact opposite effect. That there were, in fact, Pezeshkian, we learned yesterday from Vladimir Putin that when they signed that, when Russia and Iran signed that security arrangement on January 17th, that the Iranians, not the Russians, the Iranians were one who rejected having a defense pact, like Russia has with North Korea. Russia was apparently quite willing to sign such an agreement with Iran, but Iran didn't want that because they wanted to keep open their avenues to the West. They wanted to still have, hey, we could still be buddies with America and with the Brits and with the French. Now I think that worm has turned dramatically, that even the people who were opponents of the existing regime are now posting on social media their love for the regime and their hatred of the West.
Has Putin spoken to Trump this week, if my mind serves me correctly? I should imagine that the topic would have cropped up in that conversation. It wouldn't just have been about Ukraine, of that I'm quite sure, from the Russian side. Any whispers from your end on that?
No. Well, you saw the other day, again, I guess Trump's showing his age a little bit. He claimed, I just spoke to Vladimir yesterday, and Peskov comes out and goes, there wasn't any conversation. He must be talking about their conversation last Saturday. And my understanding is the call that took place on Saturday was not this, two old buddies getting together, that Putin called up Trump and just said, hey, you better sort of better pull back on this. This is dangerous and this can get out of hand. Trump presented it as a pleasant phone call, but I think it was not exchanging pleasantries over a beer or anything.
It'll be very interesting to see how these 2 weeks go, because I think I did a podcast with Danny about 2 months ago, and I said what I thought the way it would happen was that actually Iran is a very small country. Sorry, Israel is a very small country. It's 75th the size of Iran, and so it's much more vulnerable. And that actually, if they weren't able successfully to actually start the campaign well, then actually it would turn against them quite quickly. And I don't know what you think, Larry, but that's what seems to be happening to me.
I fully agree. They lack strategic depth.
Yeah.
And I draw the comparison between Ukraine and Iran. Iran is 3 times the landmass of Ukraine. Iran has 3 times the population of Ukraine. Now, if you look at all of the military force and power that Russia has poured into Ukraine over the last 3 years, the ability of that country that size to absorb that kind of punishment says something. There is no way on God's green earth that Israel can inflict anything comparable to that level of what Ukraine has experienced and endured compared to what Israel could inflict upon Iran. And so the short of using a nuclear weapon. Now, they could get into that, but the initial euphoria that accompanied the Friday the 13th strikes, there's a lot of celebration among some of my Zionist acquaintances, but I just, coyly reminded them, on December 8th, the Japanese thought they'd had a really good December 7th. But how did that pan out?
Another question for you. So these neocons at the top, for example, John Bolton, who's still an advisor, that makes sense. Yeah. I think he's one of Steve's mates. That was a joke. That was a joke, I promise. So the John Bolton, I just saw him online the other day, and he's not looking well. And he was just saying that Iraq was a success. And you think, my God, how stupid or deluded or both do you have to be? The $1 million question is, how many people are there like John Bolton at the top of the tree making these insane decisions?
I think it's a majority. It's absolute majority. And I should note, Bolton used to actually be a neighbor of sorts. He lived literally a block and a half up the street from me. One day he was out shoveling snow. I missed my chance. I could have said, I lost control of the car. I'm sorry, But,
sorry, world.
No, unfortunately, the mindset with people like the level of propaganda or gaslighting that's been underway in the United States with respect to Russia, it's unprecedented. I'm old enough to remember they call them the good old days or the bad old days of the Cold War, and in the later stage throughout the Vietnam War, but especially from '68 on, the Soviet Union was providing aircraft, even some pilots and weaponry to the North Vietnamese that were killing Americans. And during that entire period, we never heard the kind of demonization of Brezhnev or Andropov, or the Soviets were never held up to this kind of hatred and animus that is present in the United States now. And there's a refusal to actually accept that Russia today is a Christian nationalist country, and with a successful economy. Most Americans, I come back and I get accused of being, you're a puppet of Putin. I said, well, I just hadn't got my paycheck, so I guess I'll work for free.
Honestly, what I'm about to say, I promise, for all the laughter and fun it might invoke, I'm not making this up. So, I supply, as Steve and Ian both know, I supply the Ministry of Gin with various gins and rums and things, and we make bespoke ones for them. So one of my colleagues, George, and I, we were at an RAF base in Lower Oxfordshire. So this would have been the summer of 2022. So this would have been fairly early in the Ukraine-Russian conflict. And, we're serving gin and tonics, and there's young fighter pilots, smart, intelligent, articulate guys with their partners, a Sunday afternoon, smartly dressed, having a gin and tonic, and we're chatting. And, I'm just saying, what's really happening in the Ukraine war? I'm hearing this, I'm hearing that, and you never know what to believe and stuff. And the guy they were just telling me how, Ukraine was absolutely smashing Russia to bits. I was saying, well, I'm not suggesting that's not true, obviously, but that just doesn't make sense because obviously Russia's this big and Ukraine is this big.
Right.
And, the answer to that was, well, you've got no idea the significant number of weapons that's being put in there, and that's obviously true. And he said to me, I'll give you a couple of facts. He said, the thing is with Russia, and Ian's going to laugh when he hears this. He's probably heard me say it before. He said, the thing with Russia, He said they've only got 4 or 5 state TV stations in the whole of Russia, and the whole of Russia is controlled and governed by a news narrative from 4 to 5 And I said, well, I was in St. Petersburg, staying in hotels, and now that wasn't the case. Well, I don't know. I don't know how that happened, but and he wasn't lying to me. The thing was, he was not lying to me. The nonsense that he was talking, he believed, and he was telling me that one of the biggest problems that Russia's got is recruiting people, because nobody wants to fight in this really, really unjust war. And he said the problem they've got is because they're so poor, when young men and possibly women join up to join the Russian army, they have to wear their own boots and shoes because the Russian state doesn't have the money to give them shoes. I'm joking. And then a few minutes later, he got his phone out and he showed us all. And he was flying, I don't know, is it a C-17, a C-18? It's one of these big, huge
C-17.
C-17. So he showed us he's piloting with his crew, and they're flying over the Black Sea. It's pitch dark other than the moon. He's filming on his phone, and all you see are cruise missiles coming out of the sea. And I can't tell you how many they were. In my mind, I'm thinking, how many, because I don't know, how many cruise missiles can be on a submarine? How many submarines do there have to be? Because they were just going constantly.
Yeah.
And I said, I think they're like £1 million a pop, aren't they? And he said, yeah, and that's why they can't afford shoes. It's not a joke. I mean, he was serious. I mean, I say it because it's funny, because it is funny. But he really believed that. That was the difference. And
I'll tell you something from my mate Dave Fields. Steve knows him, also ex-Navy, is with me in Moscow as a naval attaché. When I first arrived, the Russians are pumping out missile corvettes like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
And their land attack cruise missile capabilities have been tested in Ukraine. The Zircon hypersonic sea-launched missile is almost on stream, I believe. And they're way ahead of our capabilities in the naval. So I mean, Steve will know more about this, than I do. But I mean, they're investing far more than we are, despite all the kind of grand statements from Keir Starmer.
I think one of the interesting things as well, I'd be curious about Larry's view, is that I think that we spend a lot on defence in the West, but I don't think we get nearly as good value in terms of the amount of money we spend. And what you think, Larry, but the Russians get much better value for money.
Yeah, I think the difference, the best writing on this is Andrei Martyanov. I don't know if you've had a chance to read any of his books. His first one, written in 2017, called Losing U.S. Military Supremacy. It really boils down to lack of there's no strategic doctrine. There's no guy. What is it? What is the overall purpose, function, and mission of the United States military? Make money for corporations. Drum up as many possible foreign adventures as you can, so that you have to increase the budget. Whereas Russia's got a very clear objective: defend the motherland. Everything we're going to be doing is to defend ourselves, because they're not looking to put together an expeditionary military force. And what happens in the United States is the entanglement of military equipment, weapons, anything that the military is going to be using with the economy, and then the politicians to stand in between them. So it is, this takes incest to a new level. It's a form of economic, political incest that, should be outlawed, but isn't. And, I saw it sort of firsthand. I lived when I was in Bethesda, Maryland. My next door neighbor is the largest defense lobbyist in town. And, I saw he was constantly, his job basically was to hold fundraising dinners for members of Congress, bring in all of his corporate clients, the Raytheons, the Lockheed Martins, the General Dynamics, and other smaller companies that you may never have heard of, have them write checks, give those checks to the members of Congress, and then when those guys that have been writing checks need something, he knows which member of Congress to call up and said, hey, it's like that scene from The Godfather where Don Corleone is passing out favors at his daughter's wedding. You know, one day I'll be calling upon you for a favor. That's what it is.
But I'm not.
Nobody owns a horse.
I was going to say, I'm not suggesting there's no corruption in Russia in their procurement and all that kind of stuff. There's corruption everywhere. But I think you can correct me if I'm wrong or put me on the right path. I believe the US spend on the military is greater than the combined military spend of many other countries put together. I remember watching online there was I don't know if it was a Senate hearing, but there was some kind of hearing. And a guy held up a little sort of plastic bag, like a little mini grip bag. When you buy a suit, it has the buttons in it. It had one of these little plastic bags, and it had some nuts and bolts in there. And he just said these go onto a blah 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 plane or whatever it was, and they cost thousands of pounds. We expect them to made of a special alloy that's been created by NASA. No, these were just box standard bolts that were available in Home Depot for a few dollars. But because they'd gone through the US procurement process, they were worth thousands of pounds.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a real example here in London. Again, I'm not suggesting that there was corruption. I'll let you guys be the judge of that and the viewers. But in 2020, you can see behind me, we make gin and spirits. You could not get hand sanitizer. I went on the BBC and I said, you can get crack cocaine, but you cannot get hand sanitizer. Got in trouble for saying that, because I thought it was funny. But yeah, so we started supplying the Ministry of Defence. So we're supplying the MOD, and we're making the hand sanitizer to the World Health or WHO, the World Health is easy for me to say, Health Organization specification. And we were charging, I think it was under £4,000. I think it was about £3,700 for 1,000 litres in a big plastic drum, 1,000 litres of WHO spec hand sanitizer, and we could knock it out. We could turn it around in about 4 days. They were buying a non-approved spec that came from Turkey that took 8 to 10 weeks. We were 70% alcohol. They were 30% alcohol. It wasn't made to the right spec, and it was £18,000 for 1,000 litres. So the guys at the MOD started placing orders with us, and then the powers that be found out and stopped it. And I got a phone call saying, "Look, really sorry, Ian, we can't buy anything from you. You're not an approved supplier to the MOD. We hadn't gone through that procurement process. It's just a national emergency, and we stepped in and made it happen, and we made it happen fast." And fortunately for me, I was very lucky on the few visits that I had to the MOD in March 2020 at the very start of the lockdown. I'm chatty. I talk to everybody. I talked to the DCOS, Deputy Chief of Staff. I talked to the Major General and the Brigadier that was there. And I was on first name terms with them. And I met them to say hello and have a cup of tea with on about 4 occasions. But that counted for something. And they made the commercial decision, ignore the powers that be and keep ordering from me. But something's not right. Something's not right.
Yeah.
3.5 grand versus 18 grand, an inferior product for 18 grand, but you must buy the inferior product. Doesn't make any sense on any level. And if it was a commercial business, they wouldn't make that decision. It's only public money, so no one cares.
Well, there's no accountability, and Trump has just up the budget to $1 trillion. So they're going to $1 trillion. Now, hey, we get some great value for our money. Let's see, the F-35 jet. I think the total cost of that's like approaching $200 million. The B-2 bomber, one B-2 bomber costs $2 billion. So, in fact, I did a comparison. The United States it's busy building F-35s. The production time for an F-35 is 18 months to 24 months. So a year and a half to 2 years.
For one aircraft.
One aircraft. During World War II, the production time for a B-24 Liberator bomber was 63 minutes. They could get it assembled in 63 minutes, but the total completion was between 18 and 24 hours.
Jeez.
So what we've done in the United States is we've gone from being able to put out a plane that could drop bombs in 18 to 24 hours to now it takes us 18 to 24 months, and it can be a bit of a hanger queen. So, I mean, this is, that's what I said. This has become a self-licking ice cream cone. Yeah. It's like a criminal conspiracy. Yeah. But let me add a little twist to it. One of my cousins, her husband, was one of the pilots in the Kansas National Guard unit that was assigned in Afghanistan. Remember that helicopter Extortion 17 that went down with the Navy SEALs, many of the SEALs that had been on the Bin Laden raid, and they were killed, and there's all this conspiracy. They were being flown by a pilot out of that Kansas National Guard unit. They had to supply themselves with night vision goggles. Okay? Wow. We got all this money in the U.S. Defense Department budget, but these National Guard pilots who shouldn't have been, and the guy that was piloting them, unfortunately, he'd been in a crash a month before, so he still had let's call it the jitters, and he really shouldn't have been piloting that aircraft. But the point was, they still had to buy some of their own critical mission essential gear. Yeah, and if you don't think that's still going on, then I've got a bridge to sell you.
Yeah.
There was one of the great, I thought, one of them fascinating on like the B-17 was the Americans built 2,751 Liberty ships during the Second World War. They're churning them out. I think 6.5 days was the quickest one. 10,000-ton ships. That's what industrial capacity is, and that's what we've exported to China and to Russia. We're wondering why they're so successful.
Look at the T-34. Look at the T-34, right?
Yeah.
The Russians moved all the industry to the Ural Mountains, in the face of Barbarossa, and then they're pouring out thousands of T-34 tanks within half a year.
I looked up the comparison on that, in that during World War II, from like 1940, the end of 42 through the end of 44, Russia and the United States were about matching each other in terms of ability to turn out tanks.
Yeah.
So comparable industrial capability then. Today, they were, I forget which article it was, but they were ridiculing about how weak those Russians are. They're only able to build 275 brand new tanks a year. How about the United States? What were we doing? Well, we got 70. We do 70 M1 Abrams, but those are actually tanks that are already built. We're just refurbishing them. I see.
You hit the nail on the head a few moments ago when you said there's no accountability, and obviously that across the pond it's exactly the same here. So I mentioned that hearing earlier, where that little bag of nuts and bolts for many thousands of pounds. Everyone's wow, that's shocking, and then it's just forgotten. Nothing's done. There's no inquiry into who's making those decisions. Who's making those decisions and why? Stop. And no one's held to account. So because I supply the MOD, I get to hear some great stories. So
can I just point out the reason you're able to supply the MOD is because you make a good product.
They don't drink enough of it.
I guarantee you that if it tasted like crap, they wouldn't be calling you up.
I'll send you a bottle out.
The guys I know there will be watching this when it goes out tomorrow. Hello. They all know they are.
But if it's any consolation, Larry, I mean, we have the Type 45 destroyer, which was the most sophisticated destroyer that we've ever built, which was delivered late and massively over budget. And within 18 months, it was in dry dock and has been there for 7 years. 7 years. In dry dock.
The guy that did the design or production of it got a cash award.
Yeah.
But all this money. I mean, a friend of mine's a senior weapons officer for the Royal Navy, and he said nothing works. Nothing works. Everything's broken. I mean, they unveiled last year the MOD the Dragonfire laser, and it's a huge laser, fits on a ship, and as the drone comes in, you see the laser go up and take the drone out. It doesn't work, and all the images, you will see no video footage of it working. Because imagine it did work, there'll be videos, won't there, just showcasing this product. No videos. But what there are just images, and they're all photoshopped because it doesn't work. And they've just spent hundreds of millions on this nonsense. But the funniest one that I heard, which when I say funny, not funny, ha ha, but just the irony of it. Some friends of mine that are in the MOD were, supplying weapons to Ukraine, British weapons. They smuggled in. This is under Boris Johnson. They smuggled in cluster weapons from America that was sent into Ukraine, which are obviously banned. And one of the crazy stories was that the Americans gave the Romanian government $1 billion. And what did they get for that $1 billion? They leased some land and they put a Reaper drone base on there. Now, there's not just one type of Reaper. There's all different variants of the Reaper drone.
Yeah.
And this Reaper was at that particular time, this is in 2022, so new and secret that non-cleared, staff that weren't authorized had to clear the area for takeoffs and landings, which they had to do. They weren't cleared by the US, but they'd been on the base. And within 6 weeks, Russia captured one of these new bases. And that 1 billion wasn't for the cost of the drone. That was just to the Romanian government, say, for permission for us to have this base. That didn't cost the build of the base, the staffing of the base, the Reaper drones. That was 1 billion just gone. It's just insane. And again, no accountability. You just can't make this up.
It is pervasive. When I showed up for my first week as an analyst on the Honduran desk back in 1986, the hallway, they had all these they're called Xerox Golden Tigers. These were computers, desktop computers, and they were all stacked in the hallway. And I said, "What happened?" And they said, "Well," and they told me the story. So one person in the office had been tasked with buying a computer. So they decided upon getting these Xerox Golden Tigers without actually testing them to see if they would be working with what the analyst needed. They got them all installed. And this person got a $25,000 cash award. Hey, good job. 6 months later, they decided that this stuff doesn't work. We're getting rid of it. So they got another guy in. His job was to get rid of the computers, which was why they were stacked in the hallway. He too got a $25,000 cash award. Nobody had to pay any of the money back for, hey, I screwed up, because I guarantee you, if you had that kind of system, that if it goes bad, you're paying. You know what? I think the system would work pretty efficiently. That's why organized crime does so well, because within organized crime, you either do what you promised to do or you get killed.
It's actually organized.
Yeah.
I mean, that just kind of sparked a memory for me, Larry, from Moscow after the Salisbury nerve agent attack, when we were predicting, having people kicked out. So we went on a mad shredding spree, and we had to rent a commercially available shredder.
That's brilliant.
So we had this Russian van drive into the embassy with a fucking shredder. So we can get rid of what.
We'll do it for you, okay? Just give us
Yeah.
Yes, we help you. We
help you for free.
We take them away.
Fantastic.
Larry, when talking about Russia and Ukraine, I think one of the good things that might come out of the Iran debacle is that actually we'll see a quicker conclusion to the Russia-Ukraine war, because actually America will stop providing weapons. I get a sense as well that the interest is falling away as well. But what do you think? Whatever happens, I mean, let's guess it's 2 weeks, let's guess it's 4 weeks. But can you see the significant reduction in interest and less of the Lindsey Grahams in America, and more likely to, okay, the time has come to walk away?
Yeah, Mr. Bone-crushing sanctions was insistent that he had 82 votes lined up last week. This week, apparently not so much. And that's the other sort of strange twist here with Trump. Trump seems genuinely intent on restoring the relationship with Russia. Yeah. And I think Budanov, the head of the SBU there in Ukraine, he predicted it. We're not going to last much beyond the end of June.
Yeah.
if we don't get renewed assistance. When you look at how Zelensky was treated, he got the reception like a patient with bubonic plague at the latest G7 meeting. Quarantine him, get him off in a separate room. Nobody was eager except for Keir Starmer. Starmer was in a hugging mood, and he loved the embrace of Zelensky. But apart from that, Zelensky's really getting the cold shoulder. And in fact, I guess they told Trump, Zelensky's coming. He goes, got to go to the airport. We got to get out of here. And so I think the Ukrainians are starting to get the message. They're no longer the first date option. They're no longer even being invited to sit down at the table. So I think I will be surprised if Ukraine is still intact by the end of this year. I think this summer is going to be really decisive. And if you listen to Putin yesterday with this meeting with a bunch of foreign representatives, he was downright cocky as far as we're pushing. He said we're pushing all along the front, and they're not stopping us anywhere. So I don't think he's being prematurely exuberant.
Yeah, now I can sort of imagine him. I mean, I'm interested in what Ian thinks, but I can imagine him looking at thinking, okay, I'm going to actually do this now, so I can actually. I don't really trust anybody in the West, so I'm going to do this in a way where actually, when I'm going to secure the objectives I need, and then I might want to negotiate. And I think that'll be sort of. I would summarize it in one expression as Novorossiya, which includes Odessa and includes right up to the Dnieper. But let's see. I don't know what you think, Ian Pro.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I've long thought actually that Putin can just bide his time because he's got the resources, he's got the unilateral power to decide what he does, when he does it. The Americans are coming on side, as Larry says, to kind of reset with Russia because it's in their interest, to do so. He's in no hurry to settle.
No.
So the pace on the front line has sped up, in the past kind of few weeks. They've made some small concessions in this body swap that's just happened this week. So he's showing small signs of willing. But, unless the people in the West, and particularly in Europe, who have all circled the wagons against any sort of peace settlement, if they're going to hold out, then Putin's going to carry on. And that rate of acceleration, I think, is going to increase.
Yeah.
I don't want to open up a whole can of worms because of time. Because the question I'm going to ask, there really isn't any simple answer. But the general public in the UK, and as Steve and Ian and myself have, all collectively discussed this, are so propagandized about what really happened with the Ukraine-Russian conflict. The majority are just parents, families living their lives, working, struggling, doing all the things that happen. And they get their news from the BBC and Sky and Fox if they're online and stuff. And most people genuinely believe that Putin woke up one morning and because he's big, bad, and the new Hitler, just invaded Ukraine. Why? Because he could. And that's what people believe. They have no idea about the history, the context. So I would love to talk to you about that another time. But my question, if it can be answered, the propaganda, my good friends, personal friends, close friends say, oh, you know more than the BBC. What? So the BBC don't know this. They're all a bit thick and you know better. And they're sarcastic and destroy me. But we would be seen as the propagandists spreading Kremlin lies, Kremlin propaganda. And, we're all against the war. None of us, here supporting the invasion. But, we're here to understand why the invasion happened. And what lessons we can learn from it. I mean, that's the most important thing.
Well, see, this you appropriately call yourself the Realists, which I commend you on. And what you're doing is
that was Ian. That was Ian's idea, not mine. Well, no, it was Steve's. It wasn't mine anyway.
It was war forever.
It was Steve's.
But actually, the programs like yours are highly influential, and it takes it outside of the normal chain. I used to I was a television talking head on terrorism issues. And I did everybody, including BBC, BC, Canadian Broadcasting, every media outlet that's, in the United States. for a while anyway. But what I discovered was what they call the pre-interview. When you're called up and they say, hey, we'd like to invite you onto the program. BBC was especially egregious on this. And they ask you the questions to find out, what are you going to say? And then once they hear it, they go, oh, listen, we've had a change of plans. Sorry, we'll get it to you. The only 2 television stations I've ever been on that never do pre-interviews, never ask what you're going to say in advance. RT, Russia Today, and Press TV, Iranian Press TV. Think about it. But here's the importance of how these numbers have changed. In 1968, in August, in the United States, we had ABC, CBS, NBC. These are private television networks. They had a combined audience of 54 million viewers a night, even though the United States population then was like 190, 200 million. Of that 54 million, Walter Cronkite alone had 27 million viewers. In August of 2016, I ran the numbers for ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox News, CNN, and MSNBC. All of those combined had an audience of 26 million.
Gosh.
Wow.
And the population
our country was then like 320 million people. My point is that the market share of these traditional media outlets continues to shrink, and I guarantee it's smaller today than it was in 9 years ago.
Good, but they're still very influential.
Yeah, but they're influential, but it's now expanding. Like Trump made a crack about called Tucker Carlson kooky, and maybe he ought to get on a network. And it's like, Donald.
He was on the network, though, wasn't he? He was on Fox.
Not only would he not go, he's drawing more people now than he ever did on any of the networks. He's actually got a farther reach. So I think what Brother Puddick has noted on this is the essential point that you've got to get out and educate people. Because the amount of propaganda that is being put out by governments, and it's the same in the United States as what you've observed in the UK.
Who was it who said, Eisenhower said, the most important thing for a country is an educated civilian population? He could not have been more right.
Can I give you a statistic on that? Right now, Russia literacy rate's like 98, 99%. China literacy rate, 98, 97%. In the United States, the literacy rate is 79%. And of that, they say that 50% of those who are literate read at the 6th grade level or lower. To your point.
What happened?
320 people in the UK entered an undergraduate degree course in Mandarin Chinese last year. The number was less for Russian. Most of our diplomats currently in Moscow don't speak Russian, hardly ever, leave the building. While the Russians and the Chinese pour out tens of thousands of people who speak excellent English every year. They populate their embassies, big embassies, with excellence of language speakers, and we have people who sit in London who think they know everything, having never been to Russia, and that's the kind of disease that we suffer from.
The only thing I know about Russia is the soldiers have no shoes.
But 2 months ago, first of March, I was privileged to be. I was accompanying Judge Napolitano and Mario Naval.
Fantastic.
And the 3 of us got to sit with Sergio Lavrov. And
it's a Jedi.
Yeah, listen, he spoke in English the entire time. Man also speaks French.
It's fantastic.
He does speak Russian. I believe he also speaks Russian, but
we'll forgive him for that.
And he speaks from his brain, not from a set of talking points. It's so refreshing to be engaged with an intellect like that. Because I cannot imagine, Marco Rubio is probably the first Secretary of State we've had in recent memory that actually speaks a foreign language. His is Spanish. But other than that, I can't recall even people as nice as George Shultz, who made us some terrible decisions with respect to U.S. involvement in Lebanon back in the day, didn't speak a foreign language. And so, in the United States, we've often taken great pride in our ignorance. Got to be good at something.
So I was going to say, I was in Budapest this past 2 days, and I met Liz Truss, and I took a selfie with her, our former Prime Minister. The one who wants to sanction everybody. And
they're very close.
Yeah, she can hardly speak English, another language, and she thinks Rostov on Don is part of Ukraine.
Yeah,
crazy. Can I ask a couple of silly questions? They're Facebook questions, so you have to forgive me. So Jack Albion from Facebook, I completely digress. Just wanted to know, was Osama bin Laden really a CIA asset once?
No, but he was.
Trained by them.
There were others like bin Laden that were. So the CIA, CIA was, I think, an important source of funds for the Chechen Islamists that started this, were involved in the Second Chechen War in Russia. And we know that this al-Nusra guy, or now more recently Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Mr. Jalani, now he's al-Shara or something. He was
hundreds of Americans.
Yeah, he was getting paid by the CIA.
Yeah.
And we got that from Jim Jeffries, former ambassador, and he was actually, I think, the ambassador for counterterrorism at State, my old office.
Yeah.
So
he said, Jim Jeffries said that he'd killed hundreds of Americans.
Yeah.
So what we've essentially done is we've recreated the caliphate. We've just put it into Syria.
I've described it. We used to have a television show in the United States. It was called Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, and it involved four homosexual guys. One was a great, fashionista. One was a great chef. One was a great stylist. And what they would do is they go find some schlubby heterosexual guy and get him all cleaned up. That's sort of what we've done with Jelani, okay? Took off all of his Mujahideen gear, trimmed up his beard, got him a Brooks Brothers suit,
giving him a BSc, and I don't mean from a university.
Yeah, God, yes. This is the stuff that Monty Python imagined.
Yeah.
And now it's become reality.
Yeah.
Now it's become reality.
Yeah.
Well, that's their, whatever propaganda is out there, the public must be able to see that.
Yeah.
Number 2 in Al Qaeda, who's cut people's heads off with bread knives. We give him money. The Britons removed sanctions from him. I think the Foreign Office gave them 50 million or something a month or so ago. I mean, you just couldn't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
They wouldn't give 50 million for building roads in bad areas, but they'll give it to some jihadists. I mean, it just, what.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say. I have no words. It's just despair.
It's things like that make people open the bottle of gin and drink copious amounts.
And it's good gin. It's good gin. It makes brilliant gin. Got to put that in.
Yeah.
I look forward to sampling it in person.
Yeah. When you come to London, we look forward to going out for a meal with you. It'll be fun.
Yeah, we'll need to get across here.
We got Danny Davis over next week. We're meeting him for dinner, which is going to be a lot of fun. So do come over.
If you have a good Korean barbecue place, take him there.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
Actually, next time you go to Moscow, there's a good Korean barbecue place on the other side of the river from Gorky Park. Just letting you know.
Oh, okay. Well, I wish I would have known that. Tell you what, I ate at 2 of the best Italian restaurants I've ever eaten at in Moscow.
Yeah.
This last week, and it was remarkable.
Awesome. So we should probably draw a line under there, I guess, guys. I mean, the big learning for me from today, of all the things we discussed about Trump, that the White House, all the security around the perimeter of the White House, I've realized for the first time today that's actually to keep Donald Trump in.
Yeah,
that's right. What's your takeaway, Ian and Steve and Larry? What's your kind of key takeaway from today?
That hopefully we've got 2 weeks without expanding to a global war, and that maybe Trump, some sense can come in to him, or Putin and Xi can actually intervene, and a deal can be obtained. Because we've got to stop this killing. The level of death that's taking place, in particular among the Palestinians, it's just got to stop.
Yeah. No, I go along with that as well. I think the thing that I will give Trump, I'm sure Puddick would be the same, is that the thing is that he is doing, ages ago, he's talking to Putin, and that's got to be a good thing to not talking to him. So actually, at least to building that relationship and stopping the killing. That's got to be.
That's hopeful.
Yeah.
I'm not a gambling man at all, but I've asked 4 people that I obviously trust within the Ministry of Defence about Iran and will this kick off. The person I trust the most, he knows who he is when he sees this, said no. He doesn't think. Sorry, forgive me. I've rephrased the question. I question: will it go to tactical nukes? Because no one wants to lose and no one wants to back down. Will it go to tactical nukes? So the one I trust the most said no. The other 3, 2 of them said that it's going to kick off tonight, and the third one said that he thinks it's going to kick off tomorrow night. But all 4 said no nukes. So we shall see.
Yeah.
And they hold respectable positions of authority in the Ministry of Defence.
On that terrifying note, as well as the terrifying observation, there are people in the MOD that you can actually trust. Thanks so much, Larry. It's always great to talk to you, mate. And do come over. We'll try and come over there. But either way, Gin will definitely be involved, and maybe some knock-off breathing as well. If you
if you're ever in the Tampa region, let me know. You got a place. You're welcome to stay.
Terrific. Thanks.
Thanks
very much, Larry.
Cheers, Larry.
Pleasure.
All right, gentlemen. Listen, I look forward to doing this again with you. Thanks for the honor of being your first.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Larry.
All right, guys.
Thank you, Larry.
Bye-bye.
Hi, it's Ian from the Rebel Realists. Thank you ever so much for watching our podcast. Please could you like and subscribe and share? It will really help us try and get the message out.